She mocked my old clothes and called me pitiful, so I stripped her of dignity, comfort, and every last dollar she stole. Her words cut deeper than she realized, her sneer aimed at my frayed coat like it could define me. But what she didn't know was that under my quiet exterior was a mind as sharp as a blade and a heart full of resolve. She thought she could take what I built, mock me, and walk away unscathed. But this time, I was the one in control. I would take back everything she'd stolen, her power, her pride, and every dollar she thought she could drain from me. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The wind clawed through Tulsa's cracked sidewalks as Clara Jennings stepped out of the rideshare and adjusted the collar of her coat. Thick navy wool with a missing top button and frayed cuffs. She'd found it last winter in a half-off bin behind the thrift store, and with the lining restitched by her own hand, it had served her well. Functional, honest. She liked that about it. The porch light of her son's house buzzed overhead. She could already hear Brittany's laughter echoing from inside, like a blade being sharpened on glass. Clara rang the bell once. The door yanked open too quickly. "Oh," Brittany said flatly, eyes skimming over Clara's coat. She held a stemless wineglass in one hand, perfectly manicured fingers resting on the rim. "I thought maybe a donation truck pulled up." Clara stepped inside without answering. Brittany's gaze narrowed. "I mean, seriously, Clara. That thing again? You look like you're panhandling in front of a gas station." Matt didn't look up. He was already seated at the table, elbows tucked tight, staring at his plate like it might rescue him from the room. "I like this coat," Clara said simply, removing it and folding it over the back of her chair. "It's warm." "It's pitiful," Brittany snorted, tipping her wineglass toward Clara like a toast. "You should let me take you shopping sometime. You'd scare fewer people in the produce aisle." Clara took her seat without flinching. The roast chicken smelled overcooked. She smoothed the napkin on her lap and replied, "If I ever need a lesson in bankruptcy chic, I'll ask." The silence cracked for just a moment. Matt shifted in his chair, chewing nothing. Brittany's smile slipped, just a hair, but she quickly plastered it back on. "Well, you've always been thrifty, resourceful," Clara corrected. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes held the steel. Dinner plodded along in awkward clinks of silverware. Brittany gushed about a luxe facial she'd booked at a spa downtown. Matt nodded along. Clara barely ate. Her throat was tight, not from the food, but from the way her daughter-in-law glanced at her with casual contempt, like she was clutter, an object out of place. By the time dessert came, Clara excused herself with a smile that didn't quite reach her cheeks. "I'll call a ride?" she said. "No need," Matt offered, but the words were limp, guilt-stained and half-swallowed. Outside, the cold air felt cleaner than anything inside that house. Across town, the thrift store bell jingled softly as she stepped inside. A familiar voice called from the back. "Well, if it isn't Tulsa's most dangerous woman in corduroy," Georgia Pike barked with a grin, emerging from behind a rack of winter scarves. "What happened? Brittany spit fire again?" Clara let the door close behind her. She didn't answer at first, just walked over to a shelf of mismatched mugs and picked up one with a faded print of a cat reading a book. "She called me pitiful," Clara finally said. "Laughed at my coat like it was a joke." George's grin faded. "She's not mocking your coat," she said softly. "She's mocking your worth." That stung more than it should have, maybe because it was true. Clara turned the mug over in her hand. 50 cents, cracked handle. She placed it back carefully. "I spent 40 years working," she said. Not quite to Georgia, not quite to herself. "Raised a son, paid off a mortgage on a secretary's salary. Never took more than I earned. You don't have to justify your life to that." Georgia bit the word back. "She thinks you're quiet and small. That makes her sloppy. She'll keep showing her cards." Clara looked at her friend, the edges of her anger folding into focus like fabric pulled taut under a needle. "Then let's count every card," she said. Georgia raised an eyebrow. Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. "Let's show her my worth in numbers." The Legal Aid Center sat wedged between a shuttered vape shop and a payday loan office with peeling decals. Clara paused outside, her thrift coat buttoned to the top, arms wrapped tightly around a folder thick with records. She stared at the sign above the door, "Free legal support for low-income residents," and took a breath like she was stepping into a courtroom, not a waiting room. Inside, everything smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. A woman behind the glass checked her ID and asked her to take a seat. Georgia had offered to come. Clara had said no. This part she wanted to do alone. After 15 minutes and 3 name mispronunciations, a man stepped into the lobby, slim in a gray shirt and navy tie, sleeves rolled just enough to show that he worked, not posed. He looked mid-40s, tired but deliberate, the kind of person who listened more than he talked. "Nolan Price," he said, extending a hand. "You're Clara?" She nodded and followed him into a small office stacked with legal binders and an ancient desktop computer, humming like a bee trapped in a jar. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "What brings you in today?" Clara placed the folder on the table with a soft thud. "My daughter-in-law is stealing from me," she said. Her voice didn't waver. Quietly, consistently, and she thinks I'm too old to notice. Nolan leaned forward slightly. Not the performative way people did when they pretended to care, but like he'd been waiting for this kind of problem all week. "She mocks me, takes over my bills, insists on paying them for my peace of mind. But I see the overdrafts, the missed statement. She thinks because I buy my clothes from a bin, I don't know what money's worth." Nolan opened the folder. What he found wasn't chaos, it was order. Color-coded tabs, monthly breakdowns, handwritten ledgers with interest rate calculations done in pencil and circled cleanly. She had been tracking this long before she said anything. "You kept all this yourself?" he asked. "I've been a secretary since before your software existed," Clara said, meeting his eyes. "I can still balance a ledger in my sleep." Nolan gave a small nod, eyes scanning transaction history and recurring withdrawals with increasing tension. "This isn't sloppy," he said. "It's quiet siphoning. She's bleeding you slowly." Clara folded her hands in her lap, jaw clenched. "She laughs at me for being frugal, said I looked like a beggar." Nolan didn't blink. "She's the one stealing." He flipped a few pages back. "Have you seen any unfamiliar charges?" Clara reached into her purse and pulled out 2 envelopes, both marked past due from utility companies she'd assumed were being paid on autodraft. "She insists everything's handled," Clara said. "She scolds me if I ask questions, says I'm being paranoid." Matt won't say anything. He just disappears into the drywall. Nolan's jaw tense. "We'll start with the bank records. I'll need authorization to contact them directly. If there's a pattern of unauthorized access, especially if her name isn't on the accounts, we have leverage." "She doesn't know I came," Clara said. "Good. Don't confront her yet," Nolan warned. "We need to build this tight. Quiet strength gets results." There was a knock on the glass. Georgia poked her head in, holding up a coffee with one hand and 2 slices of gas station pie in the other. "I figured your blood sugar was low," she said to Clara. Then, nodding at Nolan, "You must be the scalpel." Nolan raised an eyebrow. "She's the wound," Georgia said. "You're the scalpel. I'm here for stitches and moral support." Nolan smiled, just a touch. "Then let's cauterize this." Clara took the coffee and glanced at the folder again, its tabs sharp and colorful, like little flags planted on enemy ground. She hadn't come to ask for help. She'd come to start a war, one ledger line at a time. The kitchen was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock and the soft scrape of Clara's letter opener. She'd laid out the documents on the table, like surgical tools, bank printouts, check copies, her own handwritten ledgers, all aligned with the same ruthless care she once used to alphabetize files in a law office downtown. Now, her hands moved slower, but her eyes, sharper than ever. There it was. A check made out for $1,200 to Brittany Jennings, dated 3 weeks prior. Clara's signature scrawled at the bottom in smooth, fluid penmanship. Only it wasn't hers. Not even close. She pulled out a card Matt had given her on her birthday. Inside was her true signature, neat and small, with a slight upward lean at the tail of the J. She placed the 2 side by side under the kitchen lamp. The forged one was flashier, loopier, like someone trying to impersonate elegance with a stolen brush. Clara took out her phone, snapped a photo, then slid both pages into a manila envelope marked in blue ink. "Fraud. Check number 4417. A knock came mid-morning. 2 crisp raps. Clara peeked through the curtain and saw a woman standing on the porch, uniformed and calm-eyed. "Ms. Jennings?" the officer asked as Clara opened the door. That's me, Clara said. Officer Dana Cho. I'm following up on a financial crimes intake from legal aid. May I come in? Clara gestured her in and offered coffee, which Officer Cho declined. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket and spoke with the kind of calm precision Clara appreciated. Not performative, not soft, just clear. I understand you believe funds were withdrawn from your accounts without your consent? Clara slid the envelope across the table. I don't believe it. I know it. Officer Cho opened the folder and took her time with each page. When she got to the signature comparison, she let out a low whistle and nodded slowly. This is good, she said. Better than half of what we get from banks. I'll file this under potential forgery. Did your daughter-in-law have access to your checks? She keeps the book in her desk, Clara said. Claims she streamlined things. And your son? Clara hesitated. Matt avoids conflict the way most people avoid potholes. Officer Cho offered nothing more than a small nod, then asked, Any reason you think she'd escalate if she knew we're investigating? Clara looked out the window. The sun was high, but her voice stayed low. She mocks me openly when no one stops her. What do you think she does when no one's watching? Cho tapped her pen twice against the table and stood. We'll be in touch once we verify the account access trail. In the meantime, don't alert her. Let us do that. But Brittany must have sensed something, because by late afternoon, she was on Clara's porch. Without knocking, she stepped into the kitchen like she owned the oxygen. You told Matt you were feeling confused? Brittany said, fake sympathy dripping like honey gone rancid. Now you're filing police reports? Clara hit record on her phone, with her thumb, camera face down on the table. Please leave, Clara said quietly. Brittany's smile thinned. You're not thinking clearly. You're old. You've been under stress. It's easy to forget things. Clara stared at her without blinking. Every lie felt like another pin in the map. Do you remember writing that check? Brittany asked sweetly. No, Clara said. There you go. Brittany beamed. See? You probably did it without realizing. Clara didn't respond, just watched and documented. Later that night, Nolan reviewed the audio. Good, he said. Keep doing exactly that. Clara looked down at her own hand, steady, capable. The same hand that had written letters to clients for decades, balanced ledgers with no calculator, built a life from pay stub to pay stub. That was not her signature. And now, someone was finally listening. Nolan's office smelled like rain, stale upholstery soaked from people's umbrellas earlier that morning. Clara sat across from him, her coat draped over the chair back, fingers laced tightly in her lap as he typed with short, clipped strokes. His brows were furrowed, mouth set in a straight line. There it is, he muttered, then turned the screen slightly so Clara could see. Joint checking account. Opened 2 years ago. You and Brittany listed as co-owners. Clara leaned in. I never opened that. She used your social security number, he said. Probably pulled it from tax forms or one of your prescription bills. The bank didn't flag it because she passed the security question. Her stomach twisted. How long has it been active? Long enough, Nolan said. And every one of your social security checks has been redirected there for the past 17 months. Clara went still. That's... She started, but the math hit her mid-sentence. She didn't need a calculator. She had tracked pennies her whole life. She took nearly $30,000, Clara whispered. That was rent, meds, groceries. Nolan nodded grimly. I'm filing an identity theft complaint. You'll sign affidavits for both the SSA and the bank. This isn't petty theft. It's full-blown financial exploitation. Clara stared at the transaction. Brittany had spent her money at spas, boutiques, designer outlets, the places she liked to brag about over Sunday dinner, while Clara sat smiling in hand-mended cardigan. She used me to bankroll her vanity, Clara said. She used your silence, Nolan replied. And that stops now. Clara nodded once, slowly. Then she reached into her purse, pulled out a spiral notebook, and flipped to a page titled Estimated Losses, Running Total. In tidy rows, she'd tallied deductions month by month, highlighted anomalies, and assigned categories. Nolan took it like it was a deposition. This will help build the restitution case. That afternoon, Officer Cho returned, this time in plain clothes. She took a seat at Clara's dining table and opened a slim laptop while Nolan walked her through the evidence. She used a false joint account, he explained. Clara never authorized it. SSA's already flagging it for audit. Officer Cho glanced at Clara. You're okay proceeding with a formal identity theft complaint? I'm more than okay, Clara said. I'm ready. Cho gave a short nod and clicked through to add it to the growing case file. She'll be blindsided by this. Most financial predators don't expect their victims to organize. That's where she underestimated me, Clara said, sliding another folder across the table. Inside were 9 years' worth of receipts. Georgia had helped her go through every single one, digging through shoeboxes, photo envelopes, even old birthday cards with receipts tucked inside like bookmarks. Red pen marked missing payment. Yellow highlighted the purchases Clara never made. A black Sharpie circled Brittany's name where it didn't belong. Georgia now stood at the counter, sipping weak tea and watching Clara like she was watching someone turn into something new. You remember the gas station pie we used to split? She said. Clara raised an eyebrow. The one that tasted like cardboard wrapped in sadness? That one. Georgia grinned. I kept the receipt. Figured if I ever needed to prove I hit rock bottom, that was it. But now I think this. She motioned to the receipts. This is power. You're not just documenting, you're rebuilding. Clara nodded, then walked to the window, watching as a school bus passed in the distance and the wind kicked dry leaves down the sidewalk. She mocked my coat because she thought I was small, Clara said. Her voice was steady now. She thought I had nothing to fight with. And? Georgia asked. Clara turned, lips curved in a quiet, dangerous smile. She wanted my dignity, Clara whispered. She's losing hers. Clara was rinsing dishes when Nolan called. She didn't just steal your checks, he said. She borrowed against your name. Clara dried her hands on a dish towel, grip tightening. What kind of borrowing? Payday loans, Nolan said. At least 4. Possibly more. The word thudded in her stomach. Payday loans were the financial equivalent of lighting a match in a dry room. Interest stacked faster than dust on an unpaid bill. I didn't authorize any of that, she said. I know, Nolan replied, but they have your name, your social, and in 2 of the applications, your forged signature. Clara didn't speak for a moment. She just stared at the window over her sink, where the afternoon sun split across her hydrangeas like golden bars. Then she picked up her pen. What's our first step? At the strip mall legal clinic 2 days later, Clara signed affidavit after affidavit, hand steady, voice firm. Each one disputed a loan. Brittany had taken small sums with brutal terms, $800 borrowed, $1,300 owed, then another, and another. She stacked them like firewood, Nolan said grimly, flipping through the document. All tied to your credit. She never intended to pay them back. She knew you wouldn't catch on until the walls were already caving in. Clara pressed her lips together. Not anymore. I've already alerted the lender's fraud department, Nolan added. They'll freeze collection attempts, and I'm flagging your credit reports to stop further hits. Outside, the sun had turned overcast. Georgia was waiting in the car with a lukewarm coffee and a look that said she already knew. She used your name for loans? Georgia asked, eyes hardening. She did, Clara said. You still got those paper shredder scissors I gave you for Christmas? In the drawer. Good, Georgia muttered, because we're about to start slicing her narrative to pieces. The first call came 3 days later. Not to Clara, but to Brittany. It came from an aggressive debt collector asking why her name was flagged in a federal fraud report. The second call came an hour later. By dinner time, she'd had 5. By the end of the week, she showed up on Clara's doorstep. You really want to do this to Matt? She hissed. To your own son? Clara didn't flinch. She kept her screen door between them. You opened loans in my name, Clara said. And you spent my money. You'll deal with the consequences. Brittany's voice spiked. You're tearing the family apart. Matt arrived 15 minutes later, looking worn and washed out like an old bedsheet. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there in the kitchen while Clara poured coffee, eyes pleading. Mom, maybe we can all just talk. Brittany's overwhelmed. She said it got out of hand, but this isn't the way. Clara stirred in sugar slowly. You mean the way she forged my signature? Or the way she rerouted my income? I'm not saying she was right, Matt said quickly. Just, this is getting big, embarrassing. There's people talking. Debt collectors are calling her work. Clara set the spoon down with a click. She embarrassed herself. She said, I'm just shedding light. Matt exhaled. So you're really doing this? Georgia stepped out from the hallway then, arms folded, voice like gravel wrapped in velvet. No, she said. She already did it. Clara's just stitching it back together. Matt's jaw tensed, his shoulders slumped. I don't want to pick sides. Then don't, Clara said, stepping past him. But don't expect me to sit in the wreckage while she pretends it's wallpaper. He left quietly. Brittany's car engine revved seconds later, louder than necessary. But Clara didn't follow them to the window. She just walked to her desk, pulled out her folder, and labeled anew. Tab loans, fraudulent. Behind her, Georgia said nothing. She just slid over a plate with one of those awful grocery store cookies Clara secretly liked and set a cup of decaf beside it. Clara stared at the papers spread out before her. Loans she never took, damage she never deserved, and felt something rare stirring in her chest. Not just anger, control. The teller at the Tulsa Credit Union wore glasses too big for her face, and a patience Clara hadn't expected. No, ma'am, she repeated with a warm smile. You don't need to include anyone else on the account unless you want to. I don't, Clara said flatly, sliding over her ID and paperwork. It's just me now. The teller nodded and began typing. Clara's fingers rested on her purse, where Nolan had printed out direct deposit reroute forms, Social Security, pension checks, even the little monthly stipend from her old office temp agency, all being refiled to land right here, in an account Clara controlled. Alone, a clean slate. She opened her phone. One quick tap on the Notepad app, and she added another line to her list. Step 6. Secure what's mine. 2 mornings later, Brittany stood barefoot in the checkout line at the Brookstone grocery store, a cart half full with pricey organics and imported tea. She slid her card into the reader. Declined. She tried again, eyebrows twitching. Still declined. The cashier cleared her throat gently. Brittany fumbled for her phone, calling Matt with thinly veiled fury. Did you switch banks? Did you forget to transfer? What the hell is going on? Back at Clara's, a different scene unfolded. Clara sat at her dining room table, sipping black coffee and marking her latest spreadsheet with a pink highlighter. Nolan had taught her how to log evidence with timestamps. Georgia brought over a collapsible file box and labeled every divider with military precision. The door slammed open. Brittany burst in like a storm. Makeup smudged, voice pitched high. What did you do? Clara didn't flinch. You locked me out of the account, Brittany shouted, fists clenched. I had groceries, bills, and I looked like a damn idiot. Clara hit record on her phone without lifting it from the table. You had no right, Brittany spat. You're just a bitter old woman trying to punish me. Clara didn't respond. She simply slid her chair back and stood. Not fast, but firm. You think you've won? Brittany sneered. You think this makes you strong? Still, Clara said nothing. You'll regret this, Brittany hissed. I swear you will. I have influence. I have friends. People trust me. Clara just looked at her. Not scared. Not shaken. Just documenting. The silence stretched until Brittany turned, hair whipping behind her as she stormed out the door, slamming it hard enough to rattle the windows. Georgia, standing just out of view in the hallway, peeked in. Please tell me you got all of that. Clara turned the phone toward her and stopped the recording. 2 minutes, 28 seconds, she said. Full audio, clear threats, no interruption. Georgia gave a low whistle. That's courtroom champagne. Later that afternoon, Nolan sat in his office with headphones in, listening to the clip. He didn't even try to hide his satisfaction. She walked right into it, he said. Hostile tone, explicit threats, verbal admission of account knowledge. It's perfect. Clara sat across from him, watching as he filed the recording in a folder labeled Exhibit, Verbal Aggression, Financial Retaliation Pattern. Every time she speaks, she makes this case stronger, he added. And the way you stayed silent? That's control most people can't buy. I've been quiet my whole life, Clara said. This time, it's intentional. He looked up from his computer, meeting her eyes. You're winning, Clara. She didn't smile. Not yet. I'm preparing, she said. Winning comes later. That night, a text came through to Clara's phone. Matt, please, can we meet tomorrow? Just us. No Georgia. No lawyers. Clara stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard, unmoving. She didn't type back. Not yet. The first tow truck arrived just after 8 a.m. It crawled down the street like it knew it was part of a spectacle. Rusted chains swung gently in the breeze. The man behind the wheel wore mirrored sunglasses and the unbothered expression of someone used to loud scenes and unpaid balances. By 8:03, he was backing into the Jennings's driveway. Clara watched from her porch with a thermos of coffee and her coat zipped to the chin. Georgia stood beside her, hands stuffed in fingerless gloves, grinning like she was watching fireworks. Brittany's Range Rover was parked crooked as always, one tire kissing the lawn. The repo man hooked the front end without ceremony. The screen door banged open across the street. Brittany charged out barefoot, wrapped in a thin robe, mascara smudged and fury already foaming in her mouth. "Hey! Hey! What the hell do you think you're doing?" Neighbors appeared in doorways. A couple walking their dog paused at the corner. Mr. Riley from 3 doors down leaned on his rake like he'd been waiting for this. The tow driver didn't even look at her. He tapped his clipboard once. "Talk to the lender, ma'am." "You can't do this!" she shrieked. "You can't take my car." But the engine was already rumbling and the chains had done their job. Metal groaned as the vehicle lifted. "You're making a mistake. I know people," Brittany shouted, voice cracking now. "I'll sue. Clara didn't move, just took another sip of her coffee. A teenager across the street pulled out his phone, then another. By the time Brittany lunged toward the truck, the shouting was on video, high definition, clear audio, her rage in full color. "Get those phones out of my face," she screamed. "This is harassment. This is slander." "No," Georgia said softly. "This is karma in Bluetooth." An hour later, the first clip hit social media. It spread like spilled paint, Tulsa's little suburban drama catching digital fire. The caption read, "Local HOA queen loses it during repossession meltdown." Entitled Much, by noon it had over 10,000 views. Nolan printed screenshots from 3 angles. He added timestamps, comments, and usernames to the evidence folder. He didn't gloat, but he did smile. "This helps," he said, tapping the cover marked Public Behavior. "Emotional instability." "She did this to herself," Clara said. "Most bullies do." Georgia slid her phone across the table. "I posted it to my crochet blog. Had no idea hothead in heels would outperform my tutorial on infinity scarves." Clara looked down at the still frame. Brittany, mid-scream, hair wild, hands clawed at the air like a tantruming child. Behind her, the neighbors watched with tight-lipped judgment. Phones up, sympathy gone. "She wanted attention," Clara said. "Let her have it." Then she set the phone aside and opened her spiral notebook. Georgia blinked. "Aren't you going to respond?" "No." "You don't want to clear your name?" "I already did," Clara said quietly. "In court they'll see the paper trail. Out here?" The silence is louder. Georgia stared at her, then gave a slow, approving nod. "Cold as dry ice. I like it." Later that week, Officer Cho arrived with a stack of formal paperwork. She set it on Clara's dining table beside the growing case file. "Restraining orders approved," Cho said. "She comes within 50 feet of you, or attempts financial access again. She's in violation." Clara signed the documents without hesitation. "What finally did it?" she asked. Cho flipped the top page. "The outburst footage, and the threats we already have on record. Will she be notified?" "She already has been," Cho said. "Served at work. I doubt she'll forget it." Clara didn't smile, but she did lean back in her chair and exhale. Not relief, not joy, closure. Almost. That evening, Georgia returned from the store with a 6-pack of diet soda and a pie in a plastic dome. She waved it triumphantly. "You're officially a woman with legal boundaries and a trending hashtag," she declared. "That calls for apple crumble." Clara poured 2 mugs of coffee and watched the replay again. Brittany screaming while her image dissolved in pixels and public humiliation. "She talks louder the less power she has," Clara said. Georgia grinned. "And you?" "I let her talk." She reached for the remote and clicked the screen off. "I'll keep my silence." The kitchen table had become a war desk. Receipts spilled out of accordion folders like fallen leaves. Georgia stood at the counter with a calculator, reading off numbers while Clara transcribed each one into her ledger with a black pen, an exacting silence. "Total overdraft fees from last year." "Alone?" Georgia asked, squinting at a red highlighted page. $874.12. Clara jotted it down under damages, bank penalty. Her handwriting was cleaner now, less shaky. The act of writing felt like reclaiming something. "Add in the late fees from missed utilities," she murmured. "Another $619. And 2 canceled checks that bounced your insurance premiums? Georgia added. That's coverage gaps you had no idea about. Clara nodded once, tight and purposeful. By the time the last receipt was logged, the spreadsheet totaled just over $42,038 in theft, fees, missed payments, and penalties. That didn't include the emotional damage Nolan had already said they'd calculate separately. Clara added one final number beneath it all. Credit score. Impact. 127-point drop. She capped the pen, closed the notebook, and stared at the final total. She didn't just steal money, Clara said. She dismantled my financial identity one transaction at a time. Georgia reached for the pie tin, now reduced to crumbs and flaky crust dust, and we're stitching it back together. At the legal clinic, Nolan took one look at the final tally and let out a quiet whistle. She was thorough. But so were you. He placed a second folder beside Clara's. It was thinner, more clinical, labeled in clean text, emotional distress and reputational damage. Jennings, Clara. She didn't just cost you money, he said. She made you feel powerless, humiliated you, disrupted your peace, your autonomy. The state recognizes that now, and so does the judge. Clara opened the folder. Inside were typed statements she'd written with Nolan's help. Sleepless nights, anxiety about unpaid bills, the day her prescription went unfilled because a card had bounced. You want to see what healing looks like? Nolan asked. It's when your pain gets measured and they're forced to pay for every drop. Clara closed the folder and nodded once. The call came that evening. Clara recognized the number but let it go to voicemail. The second call came 20 minutes later. This time she answered and hit record before saying a word. Hello? Clara? Brittany's voice was softer than she'd ever heard it, almost breathy. I wanted to talk. Just us. No accusations. Clara didn't reply. I've been thinking. Maybe we got off track. I made mistakes. You've made your point. But maybe it doesn't need to go further. Still, Clara stayed silent. I mean, it was just money, Brittany said with a hollow laugh. We're family. That did it. Clara's voice came out low, calm. You mocked more than money. Clara, you mocked my worth, my life, my dignity. You thought I was small enough to steal from and smart enough to stay silent. There was a pause on the other end. I never meant to. Clara ended the call. The recording saved automatically to her secure folder. She forwarded it to Nolan and CC'd Officer Cho. No commentary, just fact. Later that week, Cho showed up in uniform this time. Badge visible, voice firm. We're adding the call to the record, she said. It proves she understood the harm, that she's trying to manipulate the legal process, and that she's afraid. She should be, Clara said, flipping open her ledger. Cho smiled slightly. She thought you'd fold. She never understood how many years I've spent building my spine. Cho tapped the folder. This helps. A lot. As she turned to leave, she paused at the doorway. She's going to try something else, Cho said. People like her always do. Be ready. Clara reached for her spiral notebook and added a new line. Step 8. Let her keep trying. The courtroom smelled like floor wax and tension. It was standing room only. Whispers filled the gallery as Clara stepped into the space beside Nolan, her thrifted coat folded neatly over her arm. Georgia trailed behind, settling into a pew with a slow, deliberate breath and a notepad she didn't really need, but carried anyway, like a scorekeeper. Word had spread. Neighbors, clerks, even the manager from the thrift store sat near the back, arms crossed like she was rooting for a prize fighter. The bailiff called the case. Jennings versus Jennings. Elder financial exploitation, identity theft, civil damages. Then the door opened. Brittany entered like a contestant on a reality show, high heels clicking, eyes scanning the room for recognition. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit with gold buttons that shimmered under the fluorescence. Clara recognized it instantly. She'd seen the charge, $1,462.37, from a boutique in downtown Tulsa. One of the last purchases before Brittany's access was cut. She's wearing the evidence, Clara thought. She didn't dress for court. She dressed for war. The judge, a woman in her 60s with the tired gaze of someone who'd seen every flavor of entitlement, raised an eyebrow as Brittany strutted to the defendant's table. Nolan stood and began without fanfare. He presented the ledgers first, each one tabbed, dated, annotated by Clara's careful hand. He spoke slowly, methodically. Clara sat silent, eyes steady on the pages being passed across the bench. Then came the forged checks, the identity theft affidavits, the social security routing switch, screenshots of Brittany's meltdown, her call to Clara, the threat-laced outburst caught on video, and then the receipts, one by one. This, Nolan said, holding up a boutique invoice, was purchased with Ms. Jennings's credit, unauthorized, and, as we can see, he glanced over at Brittany, pausing. Still being worn today. A few heads turned. Someone stifled a cough that was mostly a laugh. Brittany shifted in her seat, arms folding defensively. This is character assassination, she snapped. The judge didn't even blink. You'll have your turn. When Clara took the stand, she walked slowly, but not weakly. She brought her ledger with her and placed it on the witness stand like scripture. Ms. Jennings, Nolan began, you were a secretary for how many years? 42, Clara said. And how would you describe your financial habit? Orderly, careful, documented. You kept receipts? I kept everything. Were you aware that your Social Security funds were being redirected? Not until Mr. Price and I investigated. The account was created without my consent. Did you confront Brittany at any point during the theft? I didn't need to, Clara said. The truth caught up to her faster than I could. Matt was called to testify. He looked worse than Clara had ever seen him, sunken, twitchy, a man fraying at the edges. He kept his eyes on the table as he spoke. Did you know Brittany was controlling your mother's finances? Nolan asked. Matt hesitated. I thought she was helping. And when the debt collectors started calling? I didn't understand what was happening. Do you now? Matt swallowed hard. Yeah, I do. Nolan nodded. One last thing. When your mother asked for help, did you give it? Matt's mouth opened, closed. No sound came out. The silence was damning. Brittany's voice cracked the stillness like glass underfoot. She's pathetic, she barked, rising from her seat, voice shrill. She should be grateful. She had a roof, food, a family. I made her life easier. The room froze. The judge's pen stopped mid-note. I managed everything, Brittany went on. She's just bitter because I made her look good and she couldn't handle not being in control. She forged my name, Clara said quietly, still on the stand. She's twisting this, Brittany shouted. She wore that damn coat to Thanksgiving. Do you know how that made us look? A beat of silence. Then the judge leaned forward. Ms. Jennings, sit down. Brittany remained standing, chest heaving, her once perfect blazer now crumpled with rage. You may want to stop talking, the judge said coldly. Before this becomes criminal contempt. Nolan turned toward Clara and whispered, that may have been the best cross-examination I've ever seen. Clara didn't smile. She didn't have to. Her silence had finally made someone else scream. The prosecutor's office sat on the 4th floor of the county courthouse, a beige hallway with the chill of air conditioning that never quite turned off and lighting that made everyone look tired. Nolan stood just inside the DA's glass-walled conference room, arms folded, watching Assistant District Attorney Wexler flip through Clara's file. The man was precise, tall, narrow-faced, and known for having no tolerance for what he called clean, white-collar rot. This is extensive, Wexler murmured, stopping at a receipt taped beside a forged signature. And she still had access after this was reported? She did, Nolan said. Until Clara rerouted everything. Brittany only stopped when she was cut off. Wexler's jaw ticked. How long did this go on? Close to 2 years. Financial exploitation of a dependent elder, layered identity theft, mail fraud, electronic fraud, and verbal harassment of a protected party post-notification. And that's before we add emotional damages. Wexler tapped the folder once, closed it, and looked up. We're filing criminal charges. Clara sat on her porch when Nolan broke the news. They're going forward? She asked quietly. He nodded. Dual filings, civil and criminal. First hearing for the criminal side is in 10 days. They've already drafted the counts. 5 felony charges. If it sticks, it'll carry time. Clara didn't speak. She simply set down her mug and folded her hands in her lap. She stole everything I didn't say out loud, she finally said. And now she'll answer for it. In court, Officer Dana Cho took the stand with her usual calm composure. She read aloud from her reports, each incident dated and footnoted. She described the financial documents Nolan had provided, the forged accounts, the call recordings, the outbursts, and the paper trail that stretched from Clara's checkbook to Brittany's boutique wardrobe. She was not sloppy, Cho said clearly. She was calculated, but like most predators, she thought her victim was voiceless. She underestimated Ms. Jennings. Brittany sat rigid beside her new defense attorney, younger, cockier, already sweating under the collar of his off-the-rack suit. Nolan leaned over to Clara as Cho stepped down. "You ready?" Clara nodded. They didn't need to bring her back to the stand. The evidence had spoken. The charges were read aloud by the judge. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, felony identity theft, fraudulent misuse of government benefits, unauthorized use of financial instruments, and falsification of legal document. Georgia sat behind Clara, hands clasped tightly in her lap. When the final charge echoed through the courtroom, she leaned forward and whispered, "This is justice stitched tight." Clara didn't respond at first. Then, barely audible, she murmured, "I was pitiful?" She leaned forward just slightly, her voice a thread of ice. "Watch her beg now." Brittany's attorney stood and attempted damage control, argued character, claimed financial confusion, marital pressure, a poor economy, generational miscommunication. The judge held up one hand. "Stop." Silence dropped. "The only confusion," she said sharply, "is how you thought this wouldn't rise to felony-level crime. This was not a one-time mistake. This was a pattern of deliberate abuse, sustained over years." She turned to the clerk. "Freeze all assets in Brittany Jennings's name pending the outcome of both cases. No withdrawals, no spending. She is to surrender any credit or debit instruments under investigation by 5 p.m. today. Any violation will be considered contempt and obstruction." Georgia reached over and squeezed Clara's hand under the bench. Clara didn't look at her. She was watching Brittany, watching her blink, frozen, lips parted in stunned silence. No tears, not yet. But the cracks had started. After the hearing, outside the courthouse, Clara and Nolan stepped into the hot August light. The sidewalks shimmered. Reporters lingered by the building's edge, hoping for something loud. Instead, Clara adjusted the strap of her purse and walked right past them. "What's next?" she asked Nolan. "Restitution," he said. "And the formal ruling. She's still hoping for a settlement." "I'm not." He nodded. "Then we go all the way." Georgia met them by the curb, car keys in hand. "Pie?" she asked. Clara shook her head. "Not yet." She turned her face toward the courthouse steps. "Next bites after the ruling." The eviction notice was duct taped to Brittany and Matt's front door by sunrise. Clara didn't put it there. The bank did. But she did see it as she passed on her morning walk, thermos in hand. Georgia, a step behind her and humming like someone who'd just aced a final exam she didn't study for. 3 months behind on the mortgage," Georgia said, nodding at the wrinkled paper flapping in the breeze. "Guess that credit freeze hit harder than expected." Clara didn't stop walking. They built a house on stolen ground. It was always going to collapse. Across the street, a moving truck idled quietly. A young man climbed out, clipboard in hand. Timing, Clara thought. The universe had hers now. At the courthouse annex, Nolan slid a document across the table to Clara, thick with official stamps and paper that felt heavier than it looked. "Restitution's locked in," he said. "Every dollar she took, every penalty you paid, every interest charge you shouldn't have absorbed, plus emotional damages, court costs, and legal fees." Clara ran her fingers along the embossed seal. "She has nothing left." "She had you," Nolan said. "And she spent that too." He slid another paper forward, this one lighter. Clara recognized it immediately, her new credit score, 752. Georgia let out a celebratory whistle behind her. "That's clean enough to lease the moon." "Your history's been restored," Nolan added, "and flagged for protective monitoring. You're safe." Clara folded the paperwork and tucked it into her leather file folder. Not the expensive kind, the kind that zipped smoothly because it had been taken care of, like she had taken care of herself. That afternoon, Brittany tried to call. Clara didn't pick up. 2 hours later, Officer Cho arrived at Clara's porch with her sunglasses pushed into her hair and a familiar clipboard in hand. "She tried to come by," Cho said simply. "Drove up, sat in the driveway, got out of the car, walked halfway to the porch." Clara didn't ask what stopped her. "She didn't knock," Cho added. "Maybe she saw the cameras. Maybe she saw the sign." Georgia appeared at the doorway holding a store-bought pie, still warm in its plastic dome. She knows better now, Clara said. Cho handed over a signed update. Restraining order reissued. Extended by a full year. Any approach, message, third-party contact? It'll land her in contempt. Will she try again? Clara asked. Cho tilted her head. She's unraveling, but she's being watched now. By more than just you. Inside, Georgia slid the pie onto the table and cut 2 slices with a butter knife. She handed Clara a fork like it was a medal. Clara took 1 bite, closed her eyes, and let the flavor settle. Apple cinnamon, Georgia said. I figured it was time. Clara nodded. Time for a lot of things. She reached across the table and opened a new spiral notebook. Not a war journal, a clean one. Cream-colored, crisp binding. At the top of the first page, she wrote, Step 9. Stay whole. Silk sheets are cold in winter, she said softly. Georgia raised an eyebrow. That's supposed to be poetic? Clara smiled faintly. Brittany used to talk about wanting silk everything. Sheets, pillows, dresses. Thought it meant she made it. And you? I don't need silk, Clara said. She looked around at her small, clean home. The file folders, the fresh coffee, the peace in her shoulders. I have peace. Outside, the wind rustled the old oak by the fence line. A sparrow landed on the mailbox and chirped once before flitting away. Clara turned her face toward the sun. She had been called pitiful. She had been robbed, mocked, erased. And now she was rebuilding, not as someone new, but as herself, returned, piece by piece, dollar by dollar, line by line. The final hearing took 12 minutes. The judge didn't look at Brittany as she read the ruling. She didn't need to. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Ms. Clara Jennings, on all counts, she said. Full restitution of financial losses, $42,000 and change. Emotional damages, $15,000. Legal fees and court costs, $7,800. Total award, $64,837.64. A brief rustle swept through the courtroom like wind through dry paper. Brittany stared forward, jaw tight, but her hands trembled in her lap. Her attorney glanced at her with that particular kind of detachment that meant, "You're not a client anymore, you're a problem." The judge continued, voice calm and unflinching. Defendants' wages are to be garnished at the maximum allowable percentage under Oklahoma statute until restitution is paid in full. Credit history will reflect judgment status. All outstanding financial accounts related to the fraud are to be closed and flagged. She turned her gaze, finally, toward Brittany. This was not a misunderstanding. It was sustained, exploitative theft. You stripped someone of agency, dignity, and stability. Now you face the full weight of that. The gavel fell. Case closed. Georgia stood and let out a breath like she'd been holding it for months. Nolan nodded once, slow and satisfied. Clara didn't move. Not at first. She just closed her eyes and exhaled. Later, in the courthouse hallway, Georgia flung her arms open like a ringmaster. Well then, she said. Justice wears wool, apparently. Clara gave the smallest smile. I told her I liked this coat, she said, smoothing the sleeve of her deep navy thrift find. Still button missing, still hers. The next week, flyers started popping up on telephone poles and coffee shop bulletin boards across the neighborhood. Coats and Courage, a celebration of strength and stitching back what was stolen, hosted by Georgia Pike. Donations support local elder fraud survivors. Thrift coats encouraged. Pie mandatory. The turnout was bigger than expected. Clara arrived with Georgia just after 2. She wore the same coat Brittany had once called pitiful. This time, it drew compliments. She made that look proud, someone whispered. She made that look true, another said. The community who'd once stared awkwardly or turned the other way now smiled, nodded, offered firm handshakes and soft apologies. Someone brought her a slice of Georgia's homemade lemon chess pie and said they'd been following her story on the legal blog that picked it up. I didn't know how bad this stuff could get, the woman said. You opened a lot of eyes. Clara didn't gloat. She just listened. She just stood tall. Brittany didn't show up to the party. Of course not. She'd been let go from her marketing firm 2 days after the judgment. The HR director cited disruptive personal conduct and civil penalties involving financial ethics. Translation: no one wanted to be the company with her on payroll anymore. Matt had moved into a budget rental on the east side. Clara hadn't heard from him since. Nolan sent a text that afternoon with a short update. First garnishment process. Restitution on track. No appeals filed. She knows it's over. Georgia tapped her glass of sweet tea against Clara's. You're the only woman I've ever known who won a war without raising her voice. I raised my credit score, Clara replied. They both laughed. By sunset, Clara stood near the park's edge, hands in her coat pocket, watching kids toss breadcrumbs to ducks and old men play cards at picnic tables. She could still feel the weight of everything that had been taken from her. Years, savings, trust. But it didn't crush her anymore. It simply made her taller. Georgia stepped beside her and nudged her shoulder. You know, she said, the first time you walked into that thrift store in this coat, you looked like a woman surviving. Clara turned, eyes steady. And now? Now? Georgia smiled. You look like a woman who took everything back. Clara looked out over the park. Quiet. Still. Owned. It was a Tuesday morning when the envelope arrived. No return address. Just a government seal stamped clean on the corner. Clara slid it open with the edge of a butter knife, methodical as ever. Inside was the final notice from the court. Bankruptcy filing approved. Jennings, Brittany Lynn, Chapter 13. Debt reorganization. Garnishment schedule, active. Judgment status, permanent public record. Clara didn't smile, but her hands stopped shaking. At the credit union, her teller, Rebecca, met her with a warm grin and a quiet nod as she handed over the envelope. Another one came in this morning, she said. Certified check. Garnishment batch. Clara unfolded the cashier's check with a kind of reverence. Her name was printed neatly in the corner. The amount was precise, $2,884.16, a drop in the ocean of what Brittany owed, but the first drop always sounded the loudest in an empty well. Deposit to savings, Clara said softly. Automatic again next month, Rebecca said. She paused, then added, she must hate this. She earned it, Clara replied. Later, Nolan joined Clara and Georgia at the diner just past Main, the one with the chipped mugs and the biscuits that always came out too hot. She's behind already, he said, sliding his laptop toward Clara. Missed her first post-judgment payment to a private creditor. The court will come down hard. Her wages are frozen, but the collectors aren't. Georgia took a sip of her coffee, eyebrows lifted. You mean this is just beginning for her? Nolan nodded. That bankruptcy doesn't erase the restitution. She owes you until it's paid. And the minute she slips up, interest adds back. Debt collectors will haunt her like a second shadow. Clara looked at the screen. Brittany's name, Brittany's numbers, Brittany's future. It wasn't satisfaction she felt. It was clarity. She wanted credit for everything, Clara said. Now she's finally getting some. Officer Cho dropped by the next day, still in uniform but with a rare smile tucked into the edge of her mouth. Got the final incident report closed and archived, she said. Civil and criminal cases resolved, bankruptcy processed, restraining order upheld. You just stitched justice, thread by thread. Clara offered her a glass of lemonade. Sometimes all it takes is a steady hand. Cho took a sip and gave a slow, appreciative nod. You kept every receipt, and every ounce of restraint. Wasn't restraint, Clara said. It was respect. For myself. That weekend, Clara did one last thing. She walked into the thrift store that had given her warmth when no one else had, placed a sealed envelope into the donation bin, and quietly walked out before anyone could ask questions. Inside was a $500 donation, unfolded bills, crisp, quiet, made in Brittany's name. On the memo line of the check, Clara had written, "From pitiful to powerful." In honor of perspective, Georgia found out the next day when the manager called her, crying from behind the counter. "I didn't know what to say," she told Clara later. Half the staff was in tears. Clara shrugged. Let them think she turned her life around. It's the last gift she'll ever give. Georgia didn't laugh. She pulled Clara in and wrapped her arms around her like a quilt made for battle-scarred soldiers. "You're no victim," she whispered. "You're a victor." Clara didn't argue. She just let herself be held. That night, Clara pulled out her old ledger one final time and turned to the very last page. In her tight, deliberate handwriting, she wrote, "Final balance, dignity restored." Then she closed the cover and slid it into a box labeled "Keep." Not for vengeance, for proof. Proof that silence wasn't surrender, that dignity wasn't decoration, that what was stolen can be reclaimed, line by line, with enough patience and the right people beside you. As she turned out the light, her phone buzzed. A message. Blocked number? No name. Just one line. You ruined my life. Clara stared at it for a beat, then typed 2 words. You wrote it. And hit send. The ballroom wasn't grand, just a converted community center with folding chairs and a podium that creaked when leaned on too hard. But the air inside buzzed like a courtroom before a verdict. Clara stood behind the mic, fingers resting gently on her spiral-bound notes. Her navy thrift coat hung from the back of her chair. She wore a simple blouse, flats, and her dignity. I was told, she began, that shame keeps women silent, but shame isn't what stopped me. She looked out at the crowd. Seniors with notebooks, middle-aged daughters gripping pens too tightly, a few sons hunched in corners like they'd been dragged there. Georgia sat in the front row, eyes gleaming. Officer Cho, Nolan, and Rebecca from the credit union all leaned forward like students in a master class. I stayed quiet because I was afraid I'd lose what little peace I had left, but then I realized silence is what let her take everything else. She flipped to the next page. So I documented, I reported, I testified, and I won. A pause. Not for drama, just breath. And now I speak. The applause began before she finished. It built slow, steady, until the entire room rose to their feet. Chairs scraped back. Papers fluttered. A woman in the back wiped her face and whispered, "That's my mom's story too." Clara nodded once and stepped away from the podium. Not a victim, a voice. That night, the story hit the local news. Tulsa grandmother crushes daughter-in-law in courtroom showdown. The segment ran just under 3 minutes, but Clara's voice made it to every screen in town. She stood in her kitchen holding her ledger, saying simply, "They always say you can't get back what's taken. But sometimes, if you fight just right, you do." Georgia texted a screenshot with 3 laughing emojis and the message, "Local legend." Clara didn't reply. She was busy writing. Nolan arrived at her door 2 mornings later with a manila envelope and a rare sparkle behind his usual professional calm. "I submitted your name," he said, handing her the envelope. "Oklahoma Coalition for Senior Justice. They have a National Advocacy Award." Clara opened the flap and pulled out the letter inside. It was printed on thick cardstock, the kind reserved for courtrooms or celebration. Nominee, Clara Jennings. Category, Individual Advocacy through Lived Experience. "I didn't do it to win anything," she said softly. "You didn't," Nolan replied. "You did it so no one else would have to." Georgia appeared behind her, biting into a biscuit. "I told you that coat was lucky," Clara wrote in the mornings. At her dining room table, with the same pen she'd used to mark stolen checks and track fake loans, the title came easily, thread by thread, How I Sewed My Justice. Each chapter started with a receipt. Chapter 1, The Signature She Forged. Chapter 5, The Debt She Dropped on. Chapter 9, The Court She Couldn't Dress Up For. The pages were equal parts memoir and blueprint, a record of what had been done and how to undo it. Georgia called it required reading for every future mother-in-law in the country. Clara called it her ledger in narrative form. Not revenge, restoration. The letter came on a Thursday. Cream envelope, familiar cursive, Brittany's handwriting, no return address. Georgia pulled it from the mailbox and stared at it like it was a snake disguised in stationery. She tried again. She said. Clara didn't even look up from the typewriter. "Seal it. You want me to shred it?" "No," Clara said. "Return to sender." She paused, then added, "Unopened." Georgia nodded and slid it back into the outgoing slot like sealing away a ghost. Later that evening, Clara walked out to her porch, a fresh draft of her memoir tucked under one arm. The wind was light, the sky pale lavender. She sat on the swing, coat draped over her knees, and watched the quiet street. No movement at the old Jennings house. No knock. No threat. No noise. For the first time in 2 years, the silence felt like hers again. Georgia stepped out with 2 mugs of tea and handed one over. "She'll try again, won't she?" she asked. Clara took a sip, then said, "Probably, but that's the difference now." Georgia tilted her head. "I used to be the one bracing for the storm," Clara said. She turned a page in her manuscript. "Now, I'm the one building the shelter." The wind picked up around 7:30. Not sharp, not bitter, just enough to remind you that summer was leaving. Clara stepped onto her porch with a mug of dark roast and her navy coat buttoned to the top. The hem brushed her knees. The sleeves had started to fray just slightly at the cuffs. She liked it that way. A living ledger, worn and warm. Across the street, a jogger waved. A woman walking her beagle nodded and smiled like she'd always known Clara. Like the trial, the headlines, the scandal had somehow turned the quiet widow into something else. Known, seen. Clara sipped her coffee and let the silence stretch wide. Not empty, earned. Her phone rang mid-sip. She answered without looking. "It's done," Nolan said. She didn't ask what he meant. "No appeals filed," he clarified. "Statute window closed at midnight. Case closed. Judgment stands. She's officially out of legal rope." Clara stared out over the street. "How does it feel, tying the last knot?" "I imagine," Nolan said. "A lot like exhaling." She smiled, just faintly. "Then I've been practicing for this." Later, at the bank, she sat across from a new teller, younger than Rebecca, glasses too big for her face, the kind that made her look surprised all the time. "We'll be closing the old accounts completely today," Clara said. "I want to keep only the ones listed here, all in my name." "Of course," the teller said, scanning the printed forms. "Everything looks clean and secure." Clara watched as the girl clicked through screens, digitizing the last of what Brittany had once touched. No more joint anything, no more invisible hands, no more rerouted dollars or shadows. Just one woman, one name, Clara Jennings. Georgia showed up that afternoon with a shoebox of cinnamon rolls and a newspaper clipping folded like a secret. "Front page of the lifestyle section," she said, setting both down on the porch railing. "Local hero starts blog, sparks budgeting revolution." Clara raised an eyebrow. Georgia beamed. "Living frugal, fighting fierce is trending. You've got subscribers in Oregon and Nova Scotia." "It's just stories," Clara said. "No," Georgia corrected. "It's blueprints. You turned your pain into a playbook." Clara scrolled through her phone later that night. Comments filled with gratitude, with stories of stolen pensions and drained accounts, of women and men too ashamed to speak until they read her words. "I didn't know it was okay to be angry," one wrote. Clara replied, "Anger isn't the enemy, silence is." At dusk, Clara and Georgia sat out front again, steam curling up from their mugs and the faint scent of cinnamon clinging to the breeze. Neighbors passed and waved. One young couple paused to say thank you. Another left a plate of lemon bars on the porch, with a note that simply read, "We believe you." Georgia grinned. "They're saying you walk like a sheriff now." Clara didn't laugh, but her eyes crinkled at the corners. "Sheriffs wear badges," she said. "You wear receipts." She opened her blog draft and typed late into the evening, the porch light glowing above her like a low moon. The next post was titled, "How to Rebuild When They Call You Broken." The cursor blinked once. Then she typed, "They mocked my old clothes and called me pitiful, but I stripped her of dignity, comfort, and every last dollar she stole." She hit save draft, closed her laptop, and leaned back in her chair. The piece she wore wasn't loud. It didn't sparkle. It didn't shout in courtrooms or post on social media. It settled deep in the bones, a coat that fit just right. And this time, she'd stitched every thread herself.